Bam Pow Comic Hour with your hosts, Andrew Honor
and Chris Ramos
with special guest
Joshua James.
All right, tonight we are covering Rick and Morty versus Dungeons and Dragons.
Is it versus Dungeons and Dragons or just Dungeons and... Oh, it's
Yes,
versus.
versus.
Ha!
Oh.
I got something right.
All right, they're bad. This is the battle is on.
Yes, the battle is on, and we are prepared for adventures. We are reviewing the deluxe edition of the Rick and Morty vs. Dungeons and Dragons Adventures, which collects the first two series and then the bonus content that was put on there.
The Me6 thing, which I don't think we're going to go over, right?
Oh, we'll mention it.
I didn't read it.
Oh my God! That was my favorite. That's okay. I'll bring it up.
I'll read it after this podcast. I'll be inspired by our own podcast.
I will inspire you, as Rick and Morty and Dungeons and Dragons have always have. But first, Josh, what is your introduction into comics?
Comics, like the beginning, or
Well, whatever you want to,
I don't know, just the same as like any other.
What's
nerd
your origin
boy.
story?
Like growing up, being interested into like comic or superheroes and like Ninja Turtles. That's actually probably my basis, the Ninja Turtles cartoon.
Okay.
And then that goes into the X-Men cartoon, and then you're like, oh, where's this from?
Yeah, okay.
And then you get into like, oh, so there's these books that you could read with pictures. And it's like, I'm reading
The
books.
picture books.
But the picture books. And then you just like move on from there, and you just like kind of get into it. And if you're want to stay a nerd, you just kind of keep with it for the rest of your life, I guess.
Yes.
Long-time reader, first-time guest, right?
Yes.
So what is on your shelf at home? That's the most important part, with the majority-wise.
I know because we're friends.
Yeah. So a lot of Batman-esque things.
Cool.
My favorite is Nightwing, to tell the truth. Like Dick Grayson,
Yeah.
straight up. But so a lot of that, which I haven't got to, my lovely girlfriend a couple Christmas ago bought me a bunch of like Batman comics and some Nightwing ones, but she kind of got like some series of Nightwing in another part. So she thought she got one through like whatever, but so I have to piece those back together. But
that's the hard part too, because when you take a character that is not Rick and Morty, well, Rick and Morty have been around for a long time, right? But you take a character like Batman who's been around for 80 years, and everyone's like, oh, I'm going to get this run, and it's not like you have to read them in order, but it really does help.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why we did take a little break outside of our normal podcast runs, because we've been really hitting some of the classics. I think our podcast started out just real classic Spider-Man, real classic, top 10 stories, things you'd always say, well, if you were a new reader, or if you were maybe someone who's just coming into collected editions, like if there were a few that you wanted to get, like if someone said, I want to get 5 collected editions, that's kind of where the podcast started, of like, get these 5,
Sure.
And so now we're kind of getting into the world of
wackiness.
Wacky. Andrew talked me into this. I'm
Sure.
being dragged into this podcast.
Right. And so me and Josh, we're longtime Rick and Morty fans.
Yes.
We've followed the show on Adult Swim and things like that. And Ramos, you've never watched Rick and Morty.
No, I'm the old guy at this panel.
yes.
Well, you have various age children, so I imagine it's not like let's come on, family, let's get together and watch
So
this.
I'm familiar with Rick and Morty. To me, they kind of have a throwback to like Ren and Stimpy, and that's kind of like a lot of that era that I remember. So, but Rick and Morty, as far as what is the more popular thing now, what drew me to even accepting Andrew's invite to add this to the podcast list,
Yes.
was they're taking sort of that modern Rick and Morty and they're mashing it into like a modern D&D, and Dungeons and Dragons is legitimately making a comeback.
Oh, it is.
It
Yes.
really, really is, and
There's
that's
a huge
exciting to me to
resurgence in
see.
the past 5
Yeah,
years.
because I
5, 6
started
years.
standing on the doorstep of my comic shop waiting for the D&D second edition, which was like 1989. I think I was on the door being like, give me second edition.
Did you play
Oh yeah.
E1? Did you?
I had the original one, like the original box D&D, which was just like a starter
The
kit.
red box?
Yeah. In all of its glory was just like, these are the 4 things you can do. And then we started playing D&D second edition, which was pretty groundbreaking at the time. It was really, really involved. And then for some reason they just came out with, modules, and it really exploded from there.
Yeah, it was more hands-on.
Yeah,
with
second
the
edition was like
Sure.
the one at the time. And then I, to totally nerd out, I played Palladium, and I played Dark Sun, and I played Shadowrun, and we kind of went into almost every one of the more popular ones.
Sure.
And then now I'm playing D&D 5th edition, which is the
which is
D&D Beyond.
And the thing is like D&D itself, like I was listening to a podcast recently and they summed it up just perfect. Like 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, you hear like poker nights, like you have your guy friends, like you want to hang out with them, but without going to spend
Sure.
a bunch of money at the bar.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, let's have a poker night. We'll get together once a week. And it's kind of gone to the wayside. And now it's like more of D&D because, there's bigger things. Yeah. Camaraderie. Like there's more things to do than just play poker and try to take your buddy's money,
Right. Well, and like
Take a street cred.
There's even been a really big influx the last, let's say 10 years of just tabletop games and just, there's been like a really big embracing culture of just fantasy and high fantasy and just, monsters and knights and
nerds are going to rule the world.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, it did kind of help that a lot of the, computer games started embracing that, I don't think there really has been many movies out on D&D that have been like of high acclaim, but
unfortunately,
things like we were just talking about, The Witcher, Game of Thrones, it's kind of changed the pop culture back into the mindset of what I would consider high fantasy.
Sure.
Yep. So D&D allows people then to easily sort of come up with those scenarios in their head where like, 20, 30 years ago, the way that you could embrace that D&D idea was just reading books, reading novels, where now it's like
we got visual
media so people, it's not that far of a stretch to kind of do that.
And what they have is like what's called homebrew, if you're not familiar, where like people can take like The Witcher and make a story of their own with those characters, whatever, and throw players into it. So you don't have to.
That's how I started with a friend who made his own homebrew, and we just kind of followed up with that. Yeah. I knew I never played. Yeah. Well, it was a couple campaigns before that, but just to get me started, get my D&D muscles built up and not noob so hard. But it was a good time, and now we're in like the digital age where we can stream it. We have D&D Beyond, we have Roll20, we have
everything digital,
everything at our fingertips with the internet. So but I still use physical dice because I have.
And so that's what got you like wanting to like that was. That tickled your fancy to do
that
this?
was okay with me. I mean, I'm old enough to remember playing D&D and my mom coming home being like, there's this new thing out at the grocery store. It's called Cool Ranch Doritos if you want to try it. and we were like, whoa, yeah, let's try it. I don't know. And then it was like changed our lives. So, that was just connecting all of that. And that was the D&D time, Sure. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Rick and Morty. I mean, I'm familiar with their the comedy type, like the wacky sort of drawing and the wacky. And so, just to throw it out there, I was pleasantly surprised by how well this book actually meshed both of them together.
Exactly.
It was like, how is this flowing so well? It was so weird.
Well, one of those biggest parts of like all three of us, we play D&D, and you notice like they know D&D in this.
Right.
Like it's not like when you watch like a TV show and they play D&D and they're just all rolling the 1d20.
Yeah.
And it's like, are they really playing or just like, but this, you could tell like who they put work in this, and
it was like
fans.
A love story to D&D.
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
Their characters in it.
And it was some of the cool facts that I found out was in the little intro of the book. Jim Zub, one of the writers of the book, talks about he talks about how this was kind of a dream or a fantasy, if you will, of getting these two IPs of Dungeons and Dragons from Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro and Adult Swim with Rick and Morty, and trying to approach IDW, one of the big comic book publishers that kind of delves in with all these different properties and stuff. And now they kind of shifted over to Oni Press. But basically, a lot of creative properties and a lot of creative publishers and things like that go into it. And
there's a lot of
it was one of those things where it's like Marvel versus DC. It will probably never happen again, but I'm glad it did. And the spirit of the game, it lives on. And they were like, yeah, let's give this a shot. It's a really popular show. D&D is coming back. Let's see what we can make out of it and break the game.
And same with comics. Comics is making a huge comeback thanks to the Marvel movies, like so it like checks off all the boxes of like, for me personally, like Rick and Morty, D&D, and comics. Like
And I think that's probably why the volume has become sort of it's been very popular really quickly, right? Because it connects that old school thought of people who are like old school D&D players, like myself, and then the new group of sort of what's the next wave. And we've talked about that on our podcast before, that Marvel Comics can't keep just reinventing themselves for 40 and 50-year-olds. They got to figure out what they're doing for the next generation.
Oh, absolutely.
And this is a prime example of taking an older property and turning it into sort of a newer introduction. I saw this as sort of like a primer for people who are like, I don't know what D&D is about, but I like Rick and Morty. So then when they're reading it, by the time you get to the end of this, they'd say, well, this sounds cool. Because they really actually structure it. Like it starts out, how does it start out? It starts out with him wanting to like impress a girl, right?
Yeah,
yes,
that's
Annika.
That was just like the basic story.
That's all Morty does is just try to, he's a teenage boy.
Yeah, because we can all relate to that. We're like, man, we're trying to
It was
impress
the
a girl.
only thing. It was just like, what is she? And she's like, I play D&D. And he's like, I got to figure this out.
He's
and
like, I play a rogue. I think that's what they call it.
So of course, who does he go to help him figure it out?
He goes to Grandpa Rick, man.
Grandpa Rick.
And if you don't know anything about Rick and Morty, just to really quick establish that, Rick is the mad drunken scientist, and Morty is just his faithful companion.
Based off of Doc from Back to the Future.
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of okay. So it is a Back to the Future.
Yeah, it was
Basically.
originally like based off of the characters Rick and Morty were off of Doc and Marty.
Yeah. Okay. So Morty is probably like teenager.
Yeah. Teenager.
Or
preteens. Yeah. Middle school. No, I don't think even high school.
The show has huge because the show is so good and the writers are just brilliant.
And it's unfiltered. Like they're not holding any punches back.
And there's lots of theories out there about like Rick and Morty. Like it
you could go into it like fandom.
You could go down the rabbit hole.
Like is Rick the future self of Morty or something?
Yeah. That's a theory.
You called it.
That's one of the big ones. But when you were talking about you don't have to know a lot about D&D going into this. Like I was trying to find in here, but they do like little captions in here to kind of like break it down of what something means. Like I can't find it right now, but like
like they'll say a spell and then,
color spray,
or they'll say
like
they'll say do a saving throw, and then they'll be like, "What the hell are you talking about?"
And then they'll kind of give an idea what saving throw.
Yeah, roll for initiative.
So it really was. I mean, as much as it looks like, if you were to just flip through this, and I want to say like, if any 40 or 50 or 60-year-old just flipped through this, they'd be like, "This is weird," right?
Mm-hmm.
But actually, if you start reading it, looking through it, you kind of start saying, "Okay, well, they do know what they're talking about." Number one. And number two, it's playful enough that you're not like totally turned off. And there's no like, I mean, there's some potty humor, I suppose, but it's not
right.
Like,
it's the spirit.
You know what you're in for when you're picking it up. It's not like a surprise.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, as fans of the show, we're like, this is a natural progression for it. We were kind of waiting for this without waiting for it. They're like, oh, this is just like another season of the show. It's great.
Yeah.
It fills in.
As soon as this came out, I knew Andrew was just like,
oh yeah, totally. I'm like, this is real.
Yeah.
And actually what drew me into it was I was at a con once and I seen in the back of the book, they have like covers of like some of the single issues. And there was a character sheet of each of the characters. I didn't find all of them, but I was like, and I just got into D&D at the time. I was like, oh, Morty's like a rogue. Oh, and his mom's like a barbarian. Oh, this is perfect. And, he's got some of the characteristics and skills and everything on. And I was like, I gotta get them all. Well, I couldn't get them all at the time, but they're in this awesome hardcover deluxe edition. It's oversized. I was like, this is beautiful.
Yeah,
okay.
I think it was like a couple years ago at C2E2. I didn't make it, and you brought me back one of the like single issues that were handed out, the C2E2 edition. Like, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I always talk a little bit about the artwork too. So obviously this is computerized, added in. Looks like the show. I mean,
Yeah, it looks just like the show.
They just kind
Right,
of captured the animation cells and just like plopped them in here, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
So as far as like any kind of inkers and pencilers and
Sure.
things like that,
This
that's
was-
all beyond that.
yeah.
This is just
It was
digital
illustrated by
work.
Troy Little and Leonardo Atio. But those guys did a great job of bringing the show to life in this comic.
And keeping, that's the other tricky part is if you're used to moving images, like taking the Simpsons and putting them into comic form is kind of awkward, right? Because you're
Sure.
used to seeing them move.
Mhm.
But like this one, actually, there's enough activity in each background. There's enough activity going on. I mean, especially when they kind of jump into their characters, there's a lot of that like entire world of D&D.
Yeah, because they do like full
So,
pages, and you get
yeah.
to like see the beautiful artwork. Of,
Yeah, and
So-
all like the Easter eggs and things
Yeah,
like that.
that's why like I have this here, like reading it, and I would
Oh,
stop
of
and
course.
read these things.
Look in the
'cause-
background
yeah, because
and
like
all
right
that,
here,
yes.
wanted
Right.
D&D third edition players. Like,
Yeah.
like all these things. It's throughout the book you see like,
Right.
different things, and I'd
And there's-
stop and like,
There is, just since we're talking about that a little bit, there is a fair amount of like what I would consider, funny Easter eggs where they pick on themselves. D&D
Mhm.
is very aware that, there's many editions that were not popular with the fans.
Yep.
Third edition almost killed the entire franchise.
Fourth.
Fourth, sorry.
Fourth edition.
Yeah, almost killed the entire franchise, like totally just dissolved every
Right. Yeah.
dream
Morty's
that
going
you ever
through
had.
it, and
So,
it's like, first
so
edition. Oh, you're classic.
It's hilarious in here. There is a part 2 where like Gary Gygax comes back
yes,
as a
that's where,
ghost.
like,
funny story, true story. I was working on a birthday party event with a lady, and while we were getting through it for her family reunion, she said, "Are you from this area?" And I said, "Well, kind of, yeah." She goes, "Oh, I don't know if you know my husband, Gary Gygax." And I was like, "Gary, like from D&D, Gary?" And she's like, yeah, he did D&D. I was like, "Well, oh, yeah." I mean, she was just like really downplayed it. Like, yeah, like, okay, he was
Scary
involved.
for down the
Yeah,
street.
like,
yeah, because he's from Kenosha, right? Or
Lake Geneva.
Lake Geneva.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
They have
'Cause they had
like-
the museum.
Yeah, they have a museum there for him now.
yeah, and
stuff
it's like, oh my god! I mean, this was years ago, and it was just a shock to me. Just as like people are like, "Oh yeah, Gary." I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" So the book, Rick and Morty really actually does pay
homage to
to like
Gary
the
Gygax.
past, like
Yeah.
where this came from, and they put enough Easter eggs in for
like
people who are really in the know to just find a few moments where it was like, okay, that was hilarious.
like I started with third edition, and then I did play fourth edition. And funny enough, that's what ended my little group of players I had at the time. And like Andrew sent me the panel before I read it, and I got to it and I cracked up. It's the Morty asked Rick, "What about the fourth edition?" And he's like, "We never talk about the fourth edition."
Or like, they pick on the being a bard.
The
And
bard.
they-
Yeah.
Oh,
the bard.
It was
The
always
bard.
the funniest part of playing D&D was like the bard. And there was a lot too I was taking screenshots as I was reading. So I read digitally
Yep.
on Hoopla, which allows you to borrow books. And Andrew has, of course, the printed hardcover bound,
Yes.
awesome
Which is a
oversized
beautiful
editions.
book.
Yes, we love getting our hands on those books, and that's actually what we really promote on the podcast is to get yourself a real edition here that you can just sit down and just take that moment, take that time, and read in your lap. And it's it really is something.
Smell the pages.
Yeah, it's just something else.
That new page smell.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, just to see the company take the time and the effort and just the care to put that together, it's awesome.
Yeah. One of the best feelings I think is like when you're reading big books like this and you open them up and you can feel like, because it's never been read, you can feel the spine cracking.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you're like, and I think it's satisfying. And like,
Or that, or we go,
yeah, because it's common. Like, yeah.
But before we get into the actual story, there were a few things that I screenshotted. One of them was like they take like 2 or 3 pages where they become characters and they embrace the they go into the game because of the grandfather Rick, time travels and taps into
Yeah.
other dimensions. And all
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
So he's like, we will be the characters in the game, which
Mhm.
was the perfect way to transition into the story. But they took like 2 or 3 pages where they're like searching for treasures and searching for secret doors
Right.
and searching. And it was like, the caption was 5 minutes of fruitless searching later. And it's funny because that's what happens in D&D.
is,
yeah.
It's like you could be caught for 20 minutes in some part, and it's like there's nothing there.
Just
And
looting
it's just-
every
Yeah,
spot that you
looting.
get.
Oh,
you
what's
found a
under the
toenail.
carpet?
Yeah.
What's under the door? Check in the
And-
closet.
And that's like one big like thing about like as me as a player, I do all that. Like I do the role playing.
Oh yeah, totally.
And the one big part of like this is like Rick sees that there's an end to D&D, that he could conquer it, that he could win
Yes.
D&D, and like he's trying to teach Morty.
Yeah, he's the
like,
try hard.
Yeah, yeah, he's the try hard.
So now that we've geeked out, we should at least talk about the story. So it starts out where Morty is wanting to impress a girl. And
Yes, he's a
she
noob.
plays D&D and he knows nothing about it, but he tells her that he does.
Right.
So he says, well, of course I know what it is.
Yeah.
And he's at Hobby Hall, which is like Hobby Lobby.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
So he says, of course I know what it is. So then, of course, now she invites him to play with her group. And there's always that like initial, like, I don't even know.
Yeah,
how
the
to play with
awkwardness.
this.
Yeah.
Who to play with? What
Like
it's
this
about.
group has been playing for years and now I'm just going to show up.
Right.
So
He's going through like the starter set and he's like reading
Yeah.
through everything.
he's like,
"I don't
how
know."
do I learn this? So of course he goes to Rick and says, help me learn. And turns out Rick is like a super seasoned player.
Yeah.
Like he's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
From his college days and stuff. Yeah,
Yeah. He's like, do you have the dice?
Yeah, that's
He's
right,
like, I
that's
got
right.
a handful. That'll do.
and then and that's where like Rick shows him like the right way to play.
Yeah.
And he's
Yeah.
like,
The right.
what are you doing? What are you doing, Morty? You gotta be the most powerful.
And then did Morty want to be a bard when he wanted to be a bard?
Yeah,
Is
and
that what it
like
was?
at one point, because he was like trying to figure out which player he wanted to play, and I think he settled on a rogue, right?
Yeah, well, I think, Annika wanted a rogue for her session. So you knew he wanted to be a rogue, but you didn't know
Yeah.
anything, how to play a rogue.
Yeah, so he had to.
So he's like,
jump
okay,
in.
he's like, oh, but start out with this. And
That's right.
I find it, one of the things I found funny in this early adventure was when they're trying to roll dice or for their stats. And he's like, if you get a bad roll,
yeah.
That's right.
One of those
nobody's
players.
looking.
Nobody's looking.
So then
Don't do
they
that at
go
home,
on,
kids.
and it actually goes into like I think maybe 6 or 7 chapters, right? So each chapter they kind of redo it and say, we're going to like rebuild the group because like they fail in spectacular, hilarious ways, of course. So
Yes.
they kind of like work on it that way, and I think the biggest thing for us as readers was just to feel like we've experienced all of it, right?
Yeah.
But it's a
Mhm.
lot to try to say, here's, 1 or 2 issues and now you've experienced all of it. They really have a big story to tell.
Oh,
So,
yeah. It's definitely
Yeah,
relatable
like-
too.
Like Andrew said, like it's a whole new season of Rick and Morty. Like if you're craving like another season of Rick and Morty, this is definitely a pickup. Like because it's so big and there's such a big story here that it is like a full season at least.
Oh yeah, totally. But yeah, then after they roll their stats, Rick and Morty go with like Rick's old group and they're on all the seasoned players, and then he keeps dying.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
in their first adventure.
Yeah, because there's an old cartoon from the 80s, I think, the D&D cartoon,
Yes.
and that's the Dungeon Master.
Yeah, yep.
From the old cartoon. I saw that and I was like, oh my god, that's the Dungeon Master, and he makes them play like D&D in real life.
Oh yeah, when they go
So-
to the world. Yeah.
All right. So the throwback to that. So there was like this huge push in the 80s to like, I kind of like bring every nerdy thing to life. And it was really like a heyday for a lot of that. I mean, like He-Man was out and,
G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe, but like,
Transformers.
But more importantly, there were like the barbarian cartoon, and there was like the teen Ninja Turtles comic.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of that where if there was a comic, they wanted to turn it into a cartoon,
Sure.
or vice versa. Because like even Thundercats and things, they actually started He-Man cartoon first,
Yeah.
and said we're
Yep.
going to
And then
sell
we'll sell
we're
it.
going to
Yeah.
sell the action
Yeah.
figures.
Yep.
So of course D&D had to get in there and say, well, we got to make a D&D, cartoon.
Yeah.
Right? The
and they-
cheesiest thing ever. I've
It's
seen
so
it on
cheesy.
YouTube.
Yeah, it's cheesy.
They tried to make it serious, and then they added in a whole weird, like a lot of little comedic relief and stuff. But,
Well, one of the reasons it is very cheesy, campy, like it's bad, is they also wanted to like make it more, get it away from like, they're people who play D&D are trying to raise the devil, trying to get away from that. So they wanted to make it more children friendly. Like, hey, we're not
just
trying to raise demons.
Yeah.
We're role playing.
Unfortunately, it was like dramatized, and a lot of people were like playing D&D in like catacombs and sewers and stuff. So of course people were like, "Oh my god,
doing?
like this is terrible."
They're not bringing
And
my
then it was
children
like-
down in the sewer.
The beginnings of cosplay. It's like, why is that guy walking around with a robe and a staff?
So then, so of course they had to bring it into the Rick and Morty because that is like the quintessential. I mean, that is like the easily recognized D&D sort of, images. But it was hilarious that they brought him in, and because again, that just harkens back to like people who are like longtime fans and longtime followers of D&D. It's just another way for them to connect, And I was just always amazed too. They use, like you said, they use the real words of spells, and they show you how it's used, and
Like
then they
cantrips
show you
and
how
stuff.
it like fantastically fails. Like he's charging in and he rolls like a 1, and he's like, oh, this isn't going to turn out.
Yeah, I think like if I'm not mistaken, at one point in the book, like it said, oh, you get to roll with advantage or disadvantage, and like if you don't know D&D, you don't know what that means.
Sure.
And I think it breaks down as like means they get to roll twice, and then they pick the
I
highest
think Jerry
number.
did that.
Yeah.
Explained it a little bit.
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
when Jerry gets in,
Oh,
into
that's
this,
we'll
we're not there yet.
We'll
but-
get there.
So Morty, so I think he finds out pretty quickly that Rick is playing like an old school way, and he just wants to
And he
learn the game.
Right.
He doesn't
And,
want to
and he kept getting burned out by dying it with his
Yes.
like when he hang out and played first edition. He's like, I keep dying, and it sucks, and I hate this game.
That's right,
Why do I want to
he
do
had like
this?
8 hit points, 8 life
Yeah,
points.
and he keeps dying,
Yeah.
and he's like, "We'll open a new character. We'll open a new character." And he's like, "Man, I just wanted to stick to something. I want to be good at something." And so Rick's like, "All right, here." So very Rick and Morty fashion, he builds his own virtual reality, and he calls it Greyhawk. And Greyhawk is the first time Rick gets to show his stuff and what Dungeons and Dragons means to him, which is just being the best.
Yeah.
To back it up a little bit, so
Sure.
Rick like didn't want to do D&D, and I wanted to like point it out. Like if you're a fan of Rick and Morty, you
Right.
notice this. So in the show, Rick takes Morty on all these things that Morty does not want to do, but he's like, oh, here's a punch card. So
We had to bring back the punch card.
yeah, every time we do one of my things, you collect. If we do it 10 times, then we get to do one of yours. And he
That's
has
in the
this-
show.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's definitely in
and-
the show. Yeah.
And I'm trying to find it, but he
Rick
brings
is always
it
the one
to
coming up
Rick,
with adventures, but
like,
then yeah.
show me, and he shows them the punch card, and I was like, oh, that's so that could be like a homage to the fans of
So
the.
why is Rick like always drooling? What's the deal? He's just like,
Oh, he's drunk.
He's just
He's
crazy.
drunk.
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
drunk.
always drunk, yeah. There's other theories of why he's drunk all the time and stuff
Sure.
too.
Yeah. to repress his emotions, but he really just
He's
This-
just like wacky. He's totally crazy.
So this
he has
part
like a
where he has a
Crown
Crown Royal bag, I remember
Yeah.
seeing so many people with their dice bags, and it's like the purple velvet
Yeah.
Crown Royal bag.
Right.
It's funny you mentioned
Yeah.
that because it is hilarious. He just has he has all his dice in a Crown Royal bag.
Because he
I
is
just
a
noticed
drunk. Like,
that.
you were talking about him drunk, and I was like, I remember I seen people walk around with us.
for real. That's a bad.
It's my dice bag.
Anywho, so yeah, Rick builds a virtual reality called Greyhawk, which is their actual first virtual D&D adventure. And so he builds this, and they go on this quest. And Rick is a wizard in this one. He starts out as a wizard, sorcerer, and Morty is a paladin. And he's like, "Oh, this is cool. I'm kind of tough." And he kind of progresses out the adventure, and he's fighting zombies, and Morty's just having fun with his grandpa. And it's very whole starts out very wholesome, and then all of a sudden, I think Morty critically fails.
Oh yeah.
He accidentally stabs Rick as they're fighting zombies, and you could tell they didn't have to say critical fail, or they didn't say critical fail, but you kind of knew, like, if you're role playing or you're rolling dice and you hit a 1, you totally killed your buddy.
and to kind of just interject here is, if you've never played Dungeons and Dragons, so the idea of it is there's one person that's sort of in charge, the dungeon master.
Mm-hmm.
They're the one who does not play the game, but they sort of guide the game, and they're the ones who come up with all the rules and all of the the cool stuff, the bad stuff, and they try to write a little outline. But of course, anyone who's playing the game never follows that outline, so you have to do quite a bit of improv, right?
A lot.
And just figure out. So if you want them to kind of like work their way through a city, and they decide to go around the city, then you have to find a way to get them back into the city.
Sure.
So there's part of that. So the dungeon master in this comic is sort of this a little bit of Rick, but a little bit of just sort of this omniscient overseeing person. So like, if you as a player, if the dungeon master says there is there's someone that's charging at you down the hallway, the only way out of this room is out the balcony. So then if you as a player say, well, I'm just going to jump out the balcony, the next question is, well, how far is it till the ground? Right? so then as the dungeon master, you'd have to figure out, number one, can you either survive that fall, or number two, can you come up with a scenario where you won't get hurt? So then the players would say, well, I'm going to jump out the balcony, but I'm going to like throw a grappling hook and then like swing off another balcony and then lower myself down. So then if you're going to do something extraordinary, then you have to roll dice.
According to a skill.
That's where the
like
dice
that
come
would be
in.
like an athletics check right
Yeah,
there.
some sort of like, all right, you want to be pretty fancy with this. You're on the 5th floor. You got to figure out like how you're going to get to the ground.
Right.
And so when you roll dice, usually it's a 20-sided die. And if you roll a 1, something terrible happens. If you roll a 20, something perfect happens.
Exactly.
So they really, really play on that in the comic here, which is just hilarious because, if you think, okay, I'm going to jump off this balcony, I'm going to do all this athletic, and I'm going to swing, and I'm going to grapple, and I'm going to do a Batman thing, and you roll a 1, well, then
your sword breaks.
The dungeon master has to come up with something, right? Like, okay, you broke both your legs or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So, of course, take that to the Rick and Morty level. It's always something
just
like you've disemboweled your teammate or just something crazy,
because like cool. Right here, well, see, they say critical fumble. Like
right,
Morty
they do say
says,
critical fumble.
He's like, it was an accident right after he stabbed him, and Rick corrects him and says the correct term is critical fumble. And he's like yells at him, get your effing terminology right,
So all the swear words are like, asterisked out. But the other, as this story progresses, like as Andrew just said, okay, they've made their own virtual world. You kind of realize that Rick has made it super difficult, right?
Yeah, he did.
Because he's all combat driven. That's all he cares about. Because there are players you have players that just like really care about the story, or you have people who just like, I just want to kill things. I want to roll dice and just kill things all the time.
Which is usually where the characters end up, is just like, we're going to kill all the villagers. And you're like, why? What are you doing?
It's like, come on. It's the murder campaign.
Come on, I wrote 6 pages.
You killed off one of the main characters. I needed to progress the story.
Well, there we go.
And the Rick and Morty edition really actually knows about that. Like they know that you can run astray.
Sure.
So then they like regroup in the real world again, right? Like,
yep. And then we take it from the other side.
I guess I don't know. I don't want to spoil anything, but they don't really end up in the real world. It's like the thing about Rick and Morty is there's an infinite amount of Rick and Mortys.
Oh yeah.
So like
I picked up on that too, because you could tell that they were just constantly.
They've died before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like they're constantly being grabbed by some other alien species or
Yep.
something. Yeah, like that's their thing.
Yeah, that was cool.
Because if there's one
Yeah.
multiverse, there's an infinite amount of
Yeah.
like,
And that's
Right.
his mom, and then his
Sister,
Sister,
yeah.
Yep. So then they're like, "Oh, what the heck happened to them? You know, they gone. There's dirty dishes everywhere. Everything. And they don't know that they're actually dying in this alien world. They're like, pairing up, like Gary, and then Gary the Lich comes to like resurrect them. That was cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's like a janitor though.
There's always a spin.
Yeah, because this is like an off-world, like
Yeah.
galactic, like arcade, if you will. So this game, it's called Roy, that he plays in the show. Like Morty lives like a whole life of this other person named Roy, and then he
Yep.
gets brought out of the Roy thing after Roy dies, and he's like, "What just happened?" Like he just lived a whole life.
Yeah.
And, like he had a wife and kids and stuff. So and then Rick takes over this machine of like the live as Roy and turned it into.
Gotcha.
So it's
Okay.
easy to say that this directly connects to Rick and Morty fans.
Oh,
and
sure.
absolutely.
directly
It-
connects to D&D
it doesn't
fans.
sidestep.
Yeah.
It's-
Okay.
Just embrace
They
it.
knew all of it.
Rise. So yeah, they bring Rick and Morty back. They're reuniting with their family, and then they're like, "Oh, it was all about trying to impress Annika and get Morty educated on Dungeons and Dragons." But it wasn't really adventure. But we had fun. But we didn't really have adventure, and so they kind of wanted in on the action too. So like, okay, well, Mom hasn't played D&D before, but they're like, "Oh, is there drinking? Oh, is there fighting?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
and that's like her
right.
two favorite things." Just like, she gets that from Grandpa Rick. So she's like, "All right, so let's go play." And they go into, I think, they go back into the virtual world, and everybody gets to try a different class on. And it's kind of funny. They kind of make fun of like everybody's class, like,
Mhm.
"Oh, this is the tropes of like a barbarian,
Yeah.
rogue, like
So
things like that."
go back. So the mom isn't familiar with D&D, but we
Yeah.
find out the sister is very familiar with D&D.
Sure. Oh yeah, she hit
because
it
she
yeah.
plays with her friends. She doesn't talk about
Mhm.
it because her friends have board game night and sometimes they play in D&D.
Yeah.
But yeah, where you're talking about where they're making fun of like this page here where they're getting different outfits and like Harry's just like the skimpy like little thing is like, how is this going to protect me?
And
Yeah.
that's always how it goes too. It's kind of like, I don't know what the comparison would be, but you're just talking to someone and then they're like, "Oh, I got D&D this weekend." And you're like, "Oh my God, you play D&D?" It's
Right.
just,
Yeah,
it's always been that. It's always been that part of it. And it's always been about just, finding, even way back in like grade school, right? It's been finding interests that you can share with your friends.
Mhm.
Sure.
No matter what it is, and if one of your friends says, "Well, I'm super into football and stuff," it's like, "All right, let me check it out,"
Yeah.
But like, that's what D&D was, is just being creative and finding, time with your friends. And the
Good
comic
times.
does a good job of that,
Mhm.
where it shows, I think,
the
like it
natural
should-
progression.
yeah,
Yeah.
And, and then it even shows like Morty trying to get, well, that didn't work. What else can I try? And that didn't work. What else can I
Oh,
try?
Yeah,
yeah,
while
different
he's trying
scenarios,
different.
yeah.
Like,
And if you think about that
classes
in
and
like
stuff.
anything, it's like, you play board games. Well, I didn't like that board game. I want to try this one. Or like, well, I didn't like that movie. Let me try this one. Or I didn't like that D&D world. Let's try playing, this other
Mhm.
one.
Different aspect of it.
Yeah. So it is, in the grand scheme of things, it's cool to just sort of have this be reinvented every other issue.
Oh, yeah,
Like
yeah,
they die,
yeah.
and
Every
all
other
their
world,
characters
yeah,
die.
Yeah.
And then they come back with everything all over again.
Yeah.
And you're like, all right, let's try this again. It's like, like the last one failed spectacularly.
Like-
Let's try this again.
Yeah.
And that's like a lot of like Morty's arc in this is like him trying different classes. Like his end game is to be a rogue so he can play with her
yeah, with
as
Annika. Yeah.
Annika because that's what she was looking for her.
Mhm.
And
her
you get
group.
that time is passing. He's like,
Oh yeah.
I'm playing
Yeah.
with her tomorrow.
Yeah, 'cause you're-
and like I still
I
haven't
haven't did
learned.
anything. I'm steady. I know
Yeah.
nothing about this
I
game.
haven't
just
learned
keep-
anything.
I know about pain. That's what I know.
Like,
Yep.
I've died 50
And-
times.
And like you in Rick and Morty in the Rick and Morty verse,
Mhm.
they go to multiple universes and stuff like that, dimensions. But Rick will let you know time and time again that he does not time travel. Time travel is too convoluted. It doesn't
Right,
make
yep,
sense. So
yep,
he'll let
that's
you
his
know.
one rule,
So
yeah.
like
Oh.
Morty's like, oh, I have to play tomorrow. And you would think like in this instance, like, well, why doesn't Rick just put him back a week? But
so
Rick,
he hops dimensions.
he
Yeah.
hops dimensions,
doesn't-
but will not mess with time because time is too convoluted.
Yeah.
Like, the whole butterfly effect thing, like
Yeah,
you destroy
yeah.
the whole universe.
Yeah. So yeah, they go off on adventures, and everybody kind of has fun. They kind of bond over as a family, and they just have a great time with this. And they kind of find out a little bit more about each other. And they, I think, and when they first do the virtual as a family, they learn that yes, Grandpa Rick loves to play D&D, and he loves to fight. But he
Mhm.
doesn't want to do anything
He doesn't want
else
to-
but fight and loot.
He wants to
Fight
gain
and loot.
XP.
And XP, yes, just level up.
That's right.
And
That's why-
that is a way you could play D&D.
So like one of the things about bards is they're always drinking, and then the mom, she becomes a bard right away and instantly like has like a mug of beer.
Oh yeah,
Because she walks
barbarian,
in
yeah,
with
yeah.
like wine and then just like barbarian,
Yeah.
like
Right. So that was cool, and I think as they keep going adventuring, they're like, is this all we do is fight? I'm kind of tired of fighting, so they just go on their own side quests and they go into like this big beer hall or whatever, and
which
just
is
drink.
one of my
and-
favorite parts
yeah,
of the
swashbuckle a
book.
little bit. Like, oh yeah, we did that. And Rick's like, but I did this. It's nothing.
So like Morty had an idea, and then it just kind of snowballs crazy.
Yeah,
right from
Rick
there.
just-
like Rick
just
just
did
takes
his-
it to
Did his Rick thing.
the 9th degree.
Right.
Yeah, that's like where you're talking about where they go into the beer hall and stuff. That's my favorite part where like he's annoyed. He wants to get back out there to
Right.
fight, and they want to like be with the villagers and drink. They're in the bar or
Yeah.
whatever. And then Morty like finds this little girl who needs help and whatever. And then Rick just melts the whole
Right. Yeah. it just
everybody.
destroys-
Like,
yeah. He's like, no. Right. Because that's his thing, and then we kind of transition. So we're done with that world. We're like, okay. And then we get back and Jerry's there. Jerry in the cartoon is very plain, or he does everything. He's the complete opposite of Rick.
Yeah, he's the annoying.
That's
he's
what I was
the
gonna say.
annoying
You
guy,
have to
too.
explain Jerry to me because they kind of jumped right into him.
Oh
as
yeah,
a-
they
in
did.
the
They didn't
book,
give
you
too
know?
much background for Jerry.
And they just kind of had him as like, I don't know. I took him as like a over talking expert, right?
Yes.
Of this, so he's Rick's son-in-law, and I could place where this book is according to the seasons
Yeah.
because they're split.
Yeah.
So like the first 2 seasons they're married, and then Morty's parents split up, and
Yeah.
they're split up in this book. So you could kind of place it in the seasons.
Okay.
So they get him
So
he
each weekend.
still
he
comes to
gets
the
him,
house
Yeah,
or
he's-
whatever. Yeah.
Rick is just no matter what Jerry says, Rick is just always annoyed by him. because
Yeah,
he's
he's like the annoying son-in-law.
Yeah.
And-
yeah.
And Rick does, or Morty.
He's a square.
He yeah. Jerry always messes up. Like here, he goes and plugs in like a griddle
Yeah.
and just like cuts the power to
Yeah,
Rick.
it's like a
Yeah.
George Foreman grill
Yeah.
because he wants to use it.
For
And it,
some
like,
reason, he's plugging it in the garage.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because they short up.
like disconnects
Yeah.
Rick's entire thing.
Yeah.
And so Jerry, they kind of find out, oh yeah, we're playing D&D and stuff, and he's like, oh, I play D&D too. I'm actually pretty old school, I had a lot of ventures and stuff. Yeah, I'd love to play with you guys. Rick's like, no, Jerry cannot come on stage.
Yeah.
And then we bring up the punch card, and he's like, this is my weekend with my dad.
Oh, is that when he brings up the punch card?
He's
Okay.
like, this
yeah.
is my weekend with my dad. I want to play it.
Yeah.
Here's my punch card. Bam. And so like, oh, okay, fine. I'll hate it. But all right, we'll let him join the adventure. And this is where we bring in the Forgotten Realms. And we go into that world, which is different than the first world.
So, because it goes into like Forgotten Realms in
Yes.
this is like a different universe, right?
Yes.
It's not
Exactly.
a
Great
game
House, yeah,
that
whatever it
Rick
was.
made up or whatever.
Mhm.
Right.
Is that coincide with the cartoon? So I watched like
no,
a little bit
I
of
don't
it.
think they ever
like,
went.
So like the cartoon was real
Oh,
real
right.
structured, like
Mhm.
real like this is super traditional. I think they just used the cartoon as like a primer,
Okay.
Sure.
And at that time Forgotten Realms I don't even
Yeah.
think it even started. The very first Forgotten Realms book was The Crystal Shard by R. Salvatore.
Yep.
Bam. And
Dude, drop some
damn.
knowledge.
And that then like Elminster by Ed Greenwood and things that they sort of started fleshing out that world, and they wanted to have it in D&D, but at the same time they wanted to make their own world.
Yeah, because I think this is where we get introduced to the dungeon master from the cartoon.
Yes,
right? So that's why I wanted to know if that's like the cartoon is in Forgotten Realms.
Yes and no. I mean, what they tried to do, I guess the good way to kind of talk about that is like in the Marvel Comics movies, there's the MCU, but then there's also like Venom and there's other things that are like kind of like similar but different, like characters that are in it. But like Forgotten Realms never just straight up said, we are Dungeons and Dragons, but they're owned by Wizards of the Coast. And so like they all kind of like, they were all in the same idea. So you could just like that, you could just pick that world and say, I want to play there. Like I mentioned earlier, I played Dark Sun. Dark Sun was just a desert planet. So you're like, I want to play there. Shadowrun was a techno futuristic,
like cyberpunk type
yep.
thing.
So like, I want to play there. So like, it's sort of almost like the Rick and Morty is following whatever your fancy is, whatever your player is. And it's funny that Jerry showed up and said, well, I have a character and this is my character, because that's usually what happens is people are like, I have a character that I've played for 8 years and this is them. And you're like, well,
some people do that.
Yeah. Like really
they show up because like going back to like the talking to people now, and it's so popular at like, oh, you play D&D, and like, yeah, I play D&D. I play D&D. Hey, we're looking for somebody, but you don't want to like play too many campaigns.
Right.
I like to just play one campaign.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It is hard. Yeah. Because some people really do honestly have a character. They always remember their first character they made, kind of thing.
Yep.
And
like,
so they always have that.
Like my main is rogues. Or not rogues, rangers. I love rangers, but
I am the ranger.
I got, he got. So we can't have two rangers. So I got given a character which is a barbarian, and I'm attached to this character now, but like it wasn't like I didn't roll up this character.
And that's the cool part. Actually, I even like screenshotted when I was reading in there too, because there's a part in Rick and Morty where it just sort of poignantly says, Dungeons and Dragons gives you the ability to be someone else for that night, and that's really summed it all up as like, this is exactly what people are looking at, is just to fall into that character. And to sort of plug D&D a little bit, you have to pick a character and you have to pick like how that person would react, right? So if you're like, I'm going to be a super good person and I'm going to be a champion of the people, and I'm going to be a religious healer.
Yeah, what your background is.
And you're like, all right, cool. Yeah, this sounds good. Religious healer, religious person. I'm going to help everyone I can. And then while you're playing the game, you're like, I see a homeless person, I'm going to go rob them.
Yeah.
You're like, that's totally out of your character, right?
Sure.
Like you can't just, it doesn't make sense for you.
The alignment comes in. Like
the supposed to keep you on a
chaotic good or chaotic evil. And like,
so then you want to kind of pretend that you are that person, right? And so that's the whole basis of D&D, is that you can attach yourself to that character, right? And so like if there's a locked door down a hallway, as a barbarian, you might say, well, I'm just going to smash it as hard as I can, whereas like a healer mage, you might say, well, I can't smash it at all. So I'm going to just look at a different way to do that. So it is challenging in that side, that you have to pretend that you are that person, but it's also rewarding when you say, I figured it out a different way.
Yes, exactly.
And so that was cool how, when we're bringing back to like the dungeon master aspect, he shape changes based on who's like viewing them.
Yeah,
that was cool. I was like, all right, I didn't recognize a ton of the personalities they brought in, but I could see
same
some.
Like this guy, I'm not familiar. I'm assuming he's like some online personality,
right? Yeah, same with
like,
like a
critical role type,
right?
Thing. And then
they mentioned Critical Role.
I've seen that in the early beginning,
which is the most known like campaign,
modern campaign. Yeah.
But yeah, when Rick's talking to him about it, he transforms into the 70s dungeon master because Rick's older, so you would recognize him more.
Sure. And so Jerry, he's like, he's kind of showing off all his cool moves and what potential D&D can bring and the fun of it. and he kind of rekindles his relationship with his wife. So that was very cool to see. And because usually they just hate each other, or she thinks Jerry's useless or whatever. So it was cool to like make him like a real character. And,
Yeah, because it's something
kind of
he's good
like
at.
kind of man him up a little bit, give him some confidence that only D&D can give him. So that was cool. And they try different classes and stuff like that. That was cool, interesting, and you kind of see their first actual like D&D group come together.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that was fun.
And like Jerry, as they're progressing through the story, Jerry gives them like different abilities, or blesses them in different ways, or gives them
Yeah.
and he says, hey, let's try it this way. And then Rick is just like, oh, just smash things,
All through it.
It's just
He's like, I don't even want to play. I just want to be there. I'll spectate. I'll do whatever. And he tries to like use his like laser gun to get out, like his portal gun to get out. And it's like,
Yeah.
and Dungeon Master's
because
like, nah, they're staying, bro.
he transported him to a world where like, because it's D&D world, because there's an infinite amount of universes, whatever. He takes it, and the D&D world, the Dungeon Master is the most powerful thing.
Yeah.
So he gets to decide everything. So Rick is powerless here, according to the DM.
Which is a cool way to like to be the observer versus taking over the story, taking over that. He's still there, but he's letting kind of Morty and his family kind of be on an adventure for once, and he's just like a backseat driver.
and you find that Morty is starting to learn the game. And,
Yes.
the overarching story of this is that if you have a really good dungeon master, then you have a great time playing, because they are able to adapt to any situation.
Yep.
And that's what they're really emphasizing here is it doesn't matter who's playing at what level, the dungeon master should be able to embrace everybody.
Yep.
Right.
And bring up the like he's gets to see all these different things, and I think that's why the whole family is there. So Morty gets to see. Maybe I'm just looking too deep into this, but he gets to see all sides of character, the way players play. Because Rick, Rick is to try hard.
Yep.
His dad is the
He's the lore guy.
The rules. This is the rules. He knows everything.
Yep.
The mom is the new player, doesn't know anything. I'm just going in with fun. And his sister is like more of the strategic.
Yeah.
Like
that's
player.
right.
So
The more he's just there to
he's
absorb
seeing
it.
all
Yeah.
different types of players, and he's trying to figure his
Exactly.
niche.
It's the party. Yeah.
Which is the right way to play. So like, him playing in this scenario is like him also learning. And that's just, that's how you learn D&D. You just got to go into it and just try it out. And, that's what the book is really emphasizing on that part.
Sure. And, Rick kind of lost, as you kind of follow the story, Rick kind of lost his way from all that adventure, that swashbuckling, the exploring the story.
Well, he lost the friendship.
He lost the friendship.
Yes.
So especially
in
in this story that we're talking about, like he has to sit back and he kind of sees his family kind of falling in love with what he used to do. So
yeah.
So that was
he
kind
wants
of
to
cool.
show them his way of playing, though. The right way of playing.
So they do, so they don't fail. And so speaking of failing, like their first like real adventure as a group, like they go into like, oh, we're gonna kill all the orcs because they ruined this couple's lives or whatever, and they have to find the treasure. They go in, and it turns out they're the villains now.
Yeah.
And that was cool to like see that happen.
That was cool to flip the scenario a little bit. And that, like, again, I think that's what a good DM would do is just, you come in with this like preconceived notion and then flip it.
Flip it. And that's what really good storytelling can do.
And that's what we're seeing here, going and continuing this of like, we're getting to see a story being told by like this now dungeon master. Like, here's a story that you guys got to follow, and he's forcing Rick to abide by that.
Yeah.
And then he's also forcing the characters to use all of their abilities in different ways.
Sure.
Yep.
Right? Because he starts like enchanting them and stuff, and like you can see that happening.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then they kind of find their own way of redemption and just kind of learning and growing as throughout the story.
Yep.
So that was really, I think this first arc definitely had a little bit of adventure. It had swashbuckling. It had
some dark sides.
Yes.
And they had like an auction where they were selling Aegis Fang, the Warhammer from the R.A. Salvatore books. And stuff.
I didn't know that was a thing. Okay.
That's in the book.
That's like before
like
we get
Crystal Shard is mentioned.
Sure.
R.A. Salvatore is mentioned.
He's Easter eggs.
He's easily the highest selling author of Forgotten Realms.
Because I think once we get out of this story, the next part of this part, when they get back, they live in a world where D&D is like the hottest thing in the entire planet.
Everything, yeah.
And then they have like a mall, and it's like
Oh,
all
yeah.
things fantasy. And I was like, I want that store. I want somebody to buy our local like dilapidated mall and turn it into this like massive nerd store.
And then like Rick asked him like, "What'd you have for breakfast?
Oh,
what did
yeah.
you read this morning? What did you?"
And that was caused by a
Yeah.
virus. Which,
Yeah, it was a virus that
Yep.
that they brought
It
back
was,
or something.
It's all
D20
D&D.
dependence
the
outbreak.
D20 virus.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, that's cool. All right. And so yeah, D&D like comes in and invades our world because
And he's like, "What's your
there's a
favorite
whole
book?"
thing.
And then Morty's like, "Dragons of Autumn Twilight," which is like
Yeah.
the Dragonlance book.
Okay.
It's like the Dragonlance book #1. It's like the most popular Dragonlance book.
Yo.
So
Oh my
it was
gosh.
really all those little things are just hilarious.
The sportscaster, there's like not football anymore. It's like people
Yeah.
playing D&D and like their sportscast. Did you see that roll?
Yeah. Oh, he rolled a 17. You know,
Yeah.
It
Ooh,
was-
that's pretty
It's
cool.
hilarious. Yeah, here's the Aegis Fang thing.
Yeah.
Right.
And they sell the Warhammer. That's actually in all of the.
That's a pretty good
books,
deal, $89.99.
And then they
Buy
keep
it now,
adding stuff in.
because this is like an the Home Shopping Network. Like,
Yeah.
I think-
He has like a beholder hat on.
Yeah,
So
that was awesome.
The funny thing is, so Rick and Morty, so when they're trying to like do something, they just end up breaking it. Is that
Yeah.
the deal? So like
Yeah.
Rick is
Yes.
now broken
Right.
reality.
Yes.
Starts off good,
That's basically what happens.
honest, and then it's like, whoop.
Like here's the great idea, and then it just breaks reality.
It just
Yeah.
breaks it. Yeah, and that's basically what the show is. It's like how they keep breaking all these realities.
Yeah, and some of them get really scarred. And
Yeah, it
screwed
gets
up,
really bad.
and then it comes to haunt them. Yeah. The second story, the Painscape, like we said, there's a D20 dependence outbreak, and we get to kind of see the failures and misguidings of Rick's first homebrew. And he essentially created a homebrew, never finished it because he got bored, and as well as his other characters that he's like, this isn't good enough, whatever. He didn't get a good roll on something, or he just had a bad misguiding about him.
Yeah.
And he just rolled it up, threw it in the trash. Well, all of them come back.
You get to see like this is more of like Rick the place out, and he wanted to be a DM at one point, and he was
Yes.
and he was doing like the most basic characters you could see. It's just like the most basic of characters.
Yep.
The world is basic because all he wanted to do is just build a fighting simulator like of
Yeah.
D&D.
And it's kind of like if the dungeon master is not prepared, then the players are like, "What is going on here?"
What's
Like,
here? Yeah.
Right.
yeah, you're just making this up as we go.
And he gets annoyed with it himself and keeps yelling at his younger self, like, "You lazy!" Like,
Yeah, he didn't finish anything. He didn't write anything down.
And I guess we could touch on the dialogue a little bit. I mean, it's not necessarily a super heavy like
detailed.
text filled
Yes.
comic, right?
Yeah.
But it flows pretty fast. And then if you do take your time, number one, you do see a lot of Easter eggs in the background in the drawing.
Mhm.
yes,
But then also a lot of characters say a lot of stuff like in the background too.
Yeah.
So you see like little bubbles show up where their like text is really small, like they're making some little
Yeah.
comment,
Right, yeah.
and it really actually complements each other pretty
They brought
funny.
back Wubba Dub Dub. So
Yeah.
that it says a lot. So that was cool to see for us Rick and Morty fans.
And Rick changes characters constantly, so he's always like getting either stronger or overpowered or
Yeah.
Yep. OP.
Yeah. Min max is what like
Yeah.
I like
Sorcerer Rick.
Yes.
the name of his town is like Borden, and then
Yeah.
it's like scratched off because he couldn't even finish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was really cool.
And in the text bubbles, like
Yeah.
of them talking, it's
Like he doesn't know what it's going
There's
to
the
be.
square.
So it's
There's the
just not
square.
finished.
Yeah. So that was cool. Again, yeah, you kind of all the Rick's character creations kind of come back to haunt him,
Mhm.
which is interesting. And so they invade our world. Typical, when Rick and Morty adventures just get out of hand and become really hilarious.
Yep. Yeah, because it was like he made a whole bunch of different characters, and those characters are working together.
Yeah.
And then they start coming into our world, and I think Rick gets thrown somewhere else though, right?
Right.
main
Yeah.
Rick.
He goes on like his like the separate adventure, whatever.
It's like
and he
Lost
starts
in the multiverse.
Yeah.
right. And so he starts like multi-classing and becoming the most OP creation.
That's where
he
he
could
really
come up
min
with.
maxes. Like
Yeah. definitely hilarious and everything. And meanwhile, Jerry, he's like, I know what's happening. He's kind of trying to help his family out, and they're really surviving well together. But they're still holding on for dear life because the one main villain of the story, even though it was Rick, it was Bard Rick, which was great. Bard. The worst thing Jerry hated was never be a bard.
The Bard. Rick hated everything Bard.
Yeah, that too. And he got made fun of it and everything, and that was the villain that came and just he kind of.
And they always show Rick as level 12 warlock, or Rick and then at the end here it's Wizard 5. Fighter 5, Rogue 5, Cleric 5.
Too,
unbalanced multi-class Master Rick.
Yeah.
So it's he's 5th level in everything. And he's Master of none,
Yeah. The unbalanced. I love that part was thrown in there.
Yeah.
He's not very good at anything.
Sure. Yeah. He becomes friends with the Demi-Lich. I thought that was fun.
Yeah. His bard's carrying around a colored xylophone. That was the other thing. It just becomes wacky because you just see that if you're not focusing, then you just become just a mashup of all the sorts of weird stuff.
And they all have different names from all the characters with Rick in their names.
Yeah. He was he never came up with some cool I'm Born the Great, this and that.
Yeah, and it's what the class is, Barty Rick,
Road Rick,
Sourcey Rick.
So that was cool.
Barbo Rick.
Rick.
So then you think how could this all come back down to back to reality? Because it it ramps up way beyond what you would.
Yeah, the monsters start invading. There's
yes, it gets really wild at the end.
Really wild, and then it comes back down to their main reality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where you want the story to end up, is that Morty actually knows what the heck's going on again.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, because then that world of all those thrown out characters that Rick made, it completely takes over this world, and there's these other characters from big lore. If you know D&D, you would know who they're talking about.
Yeah,
sure.
They are pulling a lot of the demigods, and they're pulling a lot of just the bigger monsters that you don't really actually even battle until you're pretty pretty high level. So it is cool that they've given them all some screen time, so to say, right?
Right. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and then Rick goes off on his own because it's the family's here battling off all the creatures that are the things of all the other Ricks, and Rick's left in his unbuilt realm, and he finds a dungeon that he has to go through.
Yeah,
and he's XP, and that's what he was doing, just maxing out, just all XP.
So yeah,
right here. So where it shows the skill that he's going to use, and it says a level 0 level cantrip that
sure, yeah, and that's what we talked about was anybody could pick that up,
and it explains it a little bit. I mean, honestly, in a weird way, and I'd hate to admit this, but in a weird way, if you read this, you might have a pretty good understanding of how D&D kind of is an idea, right?
Sure,
on
that's
a really wacky really high out there way. But the other cool thing is has this book connected Rick and Morty viewers to D&D? Maybe. Maybe.
Yeah. I'd hope so.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fun way to say I got into D&D because of the Rick and Morty mashup. Okay, cool. That's great. Welcome aboard.
Because you know the bare minimum
would be I did my job.
Welcome. All right.
There's dice and there's classes and there's these skills.
Walk without a trace. Yep. There you go.
Yeah. Passed out trace. Yep.
This one where he has this awesome warrior thing, and he's like, what was wrong with you? And then you find out he has a sword. He's like, it's because of me, the S blade, and he's like -3 to intelligence, or -4 to intelligence. And the sword's like, hey, don't forget about me. The
sword is me. Dummying him up. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So definitely great. It's a great adventure book. It's funny as heck. We really love that. There is a little bonus story about, if you're a fan of Rick and Morty, of the
Meeseeks. Yeah.
Basically, the Meeseeks, it's a box. You press the box, and it comes with, "Hi, I'm Mr. Meeseeks," and so he can help you with any task you want.
Yeah, you give them a singular task, and they have to finish the task.
Yes.
Before they could disappear and live out their life.
I didn't read that part.
That's okay. That's why we're giving the crash course.
I'll go back.
You kind of have to know a little bit to actually know about the Meeseeks, I think.
A little bit,
about
exactly.
the show to actually enjoy that little
It
segment.
Alright,
could be for the
I'm
hardcore.
saved
For
then.
the yes.
Yeah, I think you're safe.
I'm
Because
safe. But as far as the volume itself, it is well made, well built. Obviously, anything that IDW puts out and Oni Press. The cover price here is $49.99, which means you can probably find it for like, I don't know, $30, right? Something
yeah,
like that.
I think so.
Sometimes Amazon or other places, online like In Stock Trades or
Yep. Cheap graphic novels
Cheap
or organic price books.
Organic Price Books. Check them
Yes.
out. They always have some sort of discount on there, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And
It's-
if you go
it's
to
a
Organic
beautiful
Price
book to
Books,
own,
you
too.
can use Bam Pow.
Bam Pow at the checkout and save $2 off your book.
That's right, $2.
Oh,
That's
nice.
that's our little
That's
give and
our
take.
new-
Give and take.
exciting announcement.
So yeah,
And it's
check
worth
them out.
it. Definitely.
And it is a fun book, and it'd be great on anyone's shelf because it would fit right in because it's hardcover and awesome and volume.
Yeah, and it's the
Oversized.
deluxe edition. There's some beautiful artwork in this. Too,
Yeah.
that just awesome. Like a lot of this, I like. That would be a cool poster, like on my wall.
Yeah, if you want to geek out, pick it up.
Yes. And this has been a great adventure in the world of Rick and Morty and Bam Pow Comic Hour. This is your host, Andrew Glonner,
And Chris Ramos.
and
Joshua James.
signing off.